So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Masira Hans, and this session that we have today is part of the Healthy Minds Roadshow. The Healthy Minds is a priority for the Bradford District and Craven Health and Care Partnership, and it's the BDC very first roadshow, which is really exciting. It's an opportunity for you to find out about all the work that we're doing in the mental health, learning disability, neurodiversity, and substance use and misuse space. And you can hear from lots of different individuals throughout our system. My wonderful colleague Isabel has put in a link to the other events within the roadshow in the link. And yeah, please sign up if you can. And again, please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat, and just tell us who you are and why you're here. And if there are any questions throughout the show, then please do put them in the chat. We monitor them and we'll answer them towards the end, but there will be an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have as well. Before we do kind of go into everything, just wanted to mention that we might be sharing some experiences or contents which you might find distressing or overwhelming, but feel free to jump out and then come back in if you want to, or if you want to contact any of us after the session, please feel free. We're asking everyone to mute your mics, and just to let you know that this session is being recorded. And we will be shared and circulated afterwards. So if you would like to turn your cameras off, please feel free to do so. And yeah, like I said, that's it. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Like I said, my name is Masira Hans, and I am the Programme Director for the Ethnically and Culturally Diverse Communities Programme. ECDC for short. And I know some of you might want to call it ACDC. I get that a lot, but we are ECDC, and what we are is a partnership of providers and NHS colleagues based in Bradford District and Craven, and what we're doing is working together to help everyone in our community achieve the mission of living happy, healthy at home. We are lots of different organisations within Bradford District and Craven. There's BDC Mind, they're staying put. We have the African Caribbean Achievement Project, BDCT, Going to Community Centre, Roshnagar, Inspired Neighbourhoods, and lots more of us all coming together to, next slide please, Isabel. What we're trying to do, or our vision for this programme, is to ensure that everybody can access mental health support how and when they need it. And our mission throughout this programme is to reduce mental health inequalities faced by our ECDC communities by creating meaningful, measurable and long-lasting structural change. Now, that's obviously very high level, but in terms of how we're going to do that, we're guided by three things and our values, which are courage, Isabel, connection, and one more, and change. So we have three values that are going to be overarching our programme, and they are values on what we're living and breathing, all of us, throughout this programme, and they are around courage, connection and change. Courage is all about not only us as professionals having the courage to do things differently, do things right, do things in a creative way, again, to support our communities, but it's also a nod to understanding that people, when accessing support for their mental health, it does take a massive amount, or it can take a massive amount of courage to share that they're struggling, that they need more support, or that actually things maybe are not what they thought they were. Connection is a very strong and important value for me personally, but it's also again about the nod to connections that our ECDC communities have within each other. So there, but also the connection that we want to have as partners amongst one another, but the connection that we want to have to our community. Our kind of strapline, if you want to say, is around being for the community, by the community. So we want to be one system, one group of people coming together to make, again, that long-lasting, structural and meaningful, which the last value is around change. We're going to have the courage, use our connection to create that change in communities, in systems, and then we're thinking national and global. We want to, again, challenge race inequity. We want to make sure, again, that people can access mental health support when they need it and how they need it. And I'm going to pass it on now to my wonderful colleague, Daniel, who's going to tell us a little bit about what values mean to him and then the rest of it. But any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we're going to answer them throughout or at the end.
Thank you, Mazira. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you here. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Daniel, and I'm the Service Manager for the ECDC program. And for myself, connection to these values, what they mean to me, just going through them individually, in terms of courage, what comes to me is really challenging the status quo. So what I mean by that is really seeking to advocate for structural changes within the mental health system and really seek to advocate for our communities that we're serving and empower their voices and really ensure that their voices and their feedback is leading towards change, leading towards culturally appropriate mental health services that they've requested. Connection. When I think about this value, I think about unity. And first and foremost, I think about unity as an internal team, as a community engagement team. Not just that, as Mazira's shared, we have some partners who are who are working alongside us to accomplish our vision and mission. So I think about unity and connection amongst our partners, but also wider. My role is really leading our community engagement efforts, but also seeking to build and create partnerships with other organizations and other leaders within this space and who perhaps have a shared vision around promoting race equity. Um, and then a last sort of element to connection, this value for me is really seeking to foster integration amongst each of these communities that we're serving. Um, there are some differing needs within the communities that we are seeking to support. But as you'll come to notice very soon, there are some shared strengths, there are some commonalities, and I think these commonalities are a wonderful bridge and a wonderful foundation, really, for each of these communities to integrate and come together. And then lastly, for me, with change, it's about playing an active role in seeking to change how mental health generally, but also how mental health support is perceived, particularly amongst men from our culturally and ethnically diverse communities. And how I go about wanting to exemplify this value is being open and honest, sharing my own lived experiences, sharing my own journey of receiving mental health support myself. So in connection to these values, that's what they mean to me personally, as a member of the African community, but also as someone who's working on this program. So, next slide, please, Isabel. Thank you. So here are the building blocks to our program. These building blocks will help us achieve the program's vision and mission, which Mazira covered earlier. However, I want to point out that as an operational team and as a community engagement team, we're mainly focusing on the top three building blocks that you can see in front of you. Now, the bottom two, of course, are extremely important in creating meaningful system change. However, I want to stress that system change can't really happen without this very first building block, community engagement. Next slide, please. So through this very first building block, and you'll have the opportunity to hear from our amazing community engagement workers in a moment. But through this building block, we're seeking to build trust with the communities we're serving. We're going out into the community, we're listening to them, we're really seeking to amplify their voices. And like I said, the feedback that they give to us as a community engagement team, in terms of recommendations for services, but not just that, really listening to their experiences of perhaps being on a journey where support hasn't been up to scratch. These things are going to help inform the services that will come into to play. It's also worth mentioning that this is a pretty new program, and as a community engagement team, we've been in post for roughly 4 to 5 months. Our community engagement workers have come into post more recently, and they've been amazing. They've been so proactive in really seeking to find out what our communities need. Next slide, please. So I will introduce you to both of them. So we have Aisha from Staying Put, and Aston from the African Caribbean Achievement Project. And again, I just want to really praise and highlight the great work Aisha and Aston have done and are doing, because again, I want to repeat myself, creating meaningful system change can't happen without this community engagement block, without this foundation. So I'll now hand over firstly to Aisha, who will share with us what she's learnt so far being in the program, and she'll also share some reflections. And following Aisha's learnings and reflections, we'll then hand over to Aston.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Aisha. I'm the community engagement worker working with the South Asian community. As Daniel mentioned, I've recently come into post within the last couple of months, but within these past couple of months, I've learned a lot about the community, and there's some things that I'd like to share with you. So some of the strengths and challenges that I have come across. So to start off with, I just want to highlight one of the strengths of the South Asian community is that it is a collectivist community. And what that means is they have community-oriented values. And the way that I've been able to leverage this in my sort of community engagement efforts is that within Bradford, there are many community groups for the South Asian community, which allow me to tap into existing community networks to hold informal conversations and discussions around service development. And further to this point, the community is very well connected. So when I am attending groups, I am able to link in with other organisations very easily. As someone always knows someone, and this really helps to build that sort of network and trust within the community, and have those sort of conversations a lot more easy and open. Another strength that I'd like to mention about the community that I'd really like to highlight is that it is a very resilient community, with a drive to want to better themselves. The South Asian community, particularly in Bradford, has a long history of overcoming adversity, a long history of resilience, whether that's sort of through migration, or striving for better opportunities for future generations. And this value in itself has played a very important part in my work, especially when discussing the development of the ECDC project and what they'd like to see from a mental health service. I'd say despite mental health being such a taboo within the South Asian community, I've learned that the community has an eagerness to learn about mental health. They want to improve their circumstances. And often that means that they are very enthusiastic about contributing to discussions and having these sort of consultations with me, especially as I do realise that I am a stranger going into these groups at first and they don't know who I am or what this programme is. So having this sort of resilience really does help. On the flip side of that, I have briefly touched on it. One of the challenges that I have encountered is that mental health is a very big taboo. It's a cultural stigma within the South Asian community. Mental health isn't fully understood, and there's often a stereotypical image of what this entails. Many people may misunderstand what mental health is. They may think that there's like a bigger issue at hand. There may be sort of cultural things that come into this. They may see it as extreme or abnormal, and they may not recognise more of the nuanced aspects of mental health. And they may not recognise things such as stress, anxiety, or depression, because these things have sort of been normalised within the culture. But overcoming this, being part of the South Asian community myself, as a South Asian woman, it's given me an insider positionality. So it's allowed me to understand some of these cultural barriers and the taboos that do exist that people may face. And often the community members do struggle to communicate their mental health experiences because they lack that sort of awareness or the knowledge or the framework to even explain what they're feeling. And because I share that cultural background with them, I can recognise that and I can relate to those struggles more intuitively. And this really helps to navigate those conversations when I am out in the community. And it helps me to bridge the sort of the gap between their lived experience and the support that's available to them, so that I am able to feed that back and share and amplify their voice. I have briefly touched on it as well, but another barrier that I have, sorry, could you go back, Isabel? Thank you. Another sort of barrier that I have encountered is that language is a barrier when discussing mental health. For some, English isn't their first language, so they're unable to sort of communicate mental health to start with because they're not sure sort of words or the language or the framework to use. But in addition to this, within South Asian languages, so for example, Urdu and Punjabi, which are my mother tongue languages, there isn't a word or a direct translation for mental health. So that in itself, I think, speaks volumes, and it shows that there is a significant barrier in communicating the importance of mental well-being, and the sort of silence around mental health within the culture. But overcoming this, I do try and hold conversations where possible in my mother tongue, so in Urdu and Punjabi, when I am in the community and talking to people. And it really helps to sort of have those open conversations, even if they do struggle to explain what they are feeling. Could I have the next slide, please, Isabel? Just a couple of reflections over the past couple of months in post. One of the key things that I've learned when I'm out in the community having these conversations is that building trust and fostering these relationships does take time, and it's very important. As I mentioned before, most of the community members, because of culture, there isn't an awareness of mental health. So having these conversations at first can be quite intimidating. And many do struggle to have these conversations out in the open with other community members. So for me, the fact that people are showing up to community groups and they are engaging with me does show a willingness to want to be part of these conversations, even if they might not fully understand or they might not feel comfortable with the topic. They are still there, and that is a really important thing. And having someone there that listens to them and can amplify their voice for them can be incredibly validating for them. And in addition to this, my insider positionality, I hold that as sort of an asset to me, and also something that I do remain conscious of, because on the one hand, it does allow me to empathize with the community and understand them on a deeper level, which really does help with those conversations. But it does also sometimes mean that I may overlook some things or may miss certain perspectives because of my own sort of familiarity with the culture. And the way I try to go about this is that I make it a point to have a debrief with colleagues after I've had a session or after I've sort of gone into a community group. And these debriefs help me to reflect on conversations and have insights from others who may not see things from the same perspective that I do, which really helps to ensure that I am having sort of a broad, open approach to my work. And lastly, something that I'd also like to reflect on and share with you is that within my work, I have noticed that I do have a tendency to want to provide reassurance and guidance when having these conversations, but the act of listening is equally, if not more powerful, when engaging with groups. Many of the individuals that I have engaged with have rarely had the opportunity to speak about their mental health or even talk about it in public. So having that listening ear from someone can be incredibly validating for them. And I think it's a skill we often take for granted. But it really does help create a space for people to feel valued and understood and also empowered to share their experiences. And I guess for me, that just helps build that trust within the community to hold us meaningful conversations, which will help drive our programme. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to my sort of reflections and my learnings from the past couple of months. I'll hand over to Aston now, who'll also be doing the same.
Hi everyone, thank you Aisha. Basically I'm Aston. I'm the community engagement worker for the Black African and Black Caribbean community. I'm based at ACAP, which is the African Caribbean Achievement Project, and I've been in post a month yesterday. So I'm still kind of new to the role. A lot of what I've been doing over the past month is just kind of engaging with the community in a sense of making myself kind of known, becoming a familiar face in different spaces, and yeah, just trying to build up some kind of trust and rapport so that the next kind of phase of my role is to really start diving into like the feedback and the consultations and looking into kind of the access to mental health care. So yeah, I will go on to kind of the strengths and challenges that I've seen so far. I'll start with bad and I'll end on the good. So I definitely say that one of the biggest challenges that has kind of come out through conversations that I've had so far is there is just a massive mistrust with the services that are in place at the moment. And a lot of that mistrust comes from kind of the lack of cultural sensitivity. So I don't have the stats with me right now, but just through conversations and through research that I've done, a lot of the Black African and Black Caribbean community, when they do kind of reach out to mental health services, not everyone, but a lot, it's usually at crisis point. So when it's kind of the kind of earlier stages of struggling with mental health, whether that's stress, anxiety, just kind of not feeling like yourself, it's a lot of that is kind of internalized, and until it gets to that point where it's I don't really know what to do now, and they do try and access the services, it's created this mistrust because a lot of people are being sectioned. So if you look on the wards, it's massively disproportionate to kind of what the demographic in Bradford is. So the Black African and Black Caribbean demographic in Bradford is 2%. And it's in the, I can't think of it off the top of my head, and I don't want to kind of put any figures out there that aren't true, but it's a much higher percentage that are actually in the wards that have been sectioned. Another kind of bit of feedback that I've had with the mistrust is that the like I said a minute ago, the cultural kind of insensitivity. So sometimes if it's kind of a racially fueled reason for why mental health is kind of being struggled with at the moment, it's not really been taken seriously from the feedback that I've been getting from the community. If they're going in and they're feeling a certain way, that's due to the race or due to cultural differences. It's just a lot of people have said that they kind of get told, have a hot bath, have a cup of tea, and they're not really being heard. So that's kind of been a big thing that I'm trying to kind of have conversations about. I've accessed services myself, and I have experienced these myself. So on the positive side, I'm able to kind of empathise and relate and share my stories and be vulnerable with people myself, which then in turn allows them to be a little bit more vulnerable with me and be a little bit more open to speaking to me about things. And then the other challenge, very, very similar to what Aisha's found in the South Asian community, is the stigmas around mental health. Specifically with men, I found, that culturally they have to maintain this very strong you know, sorry, someone just tried to walk into the room, a very kind of strong demeanor. You know, men don't cry. They have a lot of responsibilities as a man in the culture to provide for their family, provide for the people around them. And in order to do that, they can't show any weakness. So when I talk about mental health, instantly I kind of see the body language change, and you know, it doesn't exist in a lot of spaces. And then a lot of the other stigmas, there's internalized stigma. So, you know, people don't want to kind of be portrayed in a certain way, but there's also the outside stigmas of nobody wants to look weak, religiously, like in the place of worship. There's some stigma around, you know, God has a plan, or you know, there's a kind of a path already out there. So, and mental health services aren't there to help you, but the places of worship are the places where you should go. But again, it's not really spoken about in terms of mental health. And then the other side of things, the positive things that I've come across, which again, Aisha mentioned, it's so similar and there's so many kind of overlaps with the South Asian community, but that resilience is just, it just bursts, like you can just feel it. And everywhere I've been and everywhere I've kind of visited the different organisations that are already kind of out there and have been out there for years, as soon as I walk through the door, it is love, it's happiness, the food is incredible, there's music playing and people are just celebrating their culture, and there's so much happiness and pride of who we are as a community and everything that comes with being part of that community. So that has been really, really amazing to see, just kind of that resilience coming from the African Caribbean and Africa and Black African communities. And again, in turn, that plays into the community spirit. It's just, I can't put into words kind of what that community spirit is. It's a feeling rather than something that you can just kind of write down on paper. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. Like I said, I'm very, very new to the post. There have been some conversations that I've kind of tried to engage with, but I think one of the things that I've also learned is that the term mental health, there's a lot of stigma around that term, whereas when I kind of walk into a room and I talk about well-being, and you know, just kind of looking after yourself and just asking more so like, when you don't feel okay, kind of how do you deal with that, rather than being, how is your mental health? Have you accessed mental health services? Feel like it's a lot of the wording that I'm going to have to kind of learn to be able to really engage with the community and have people kind of let their guard down. So Isabel, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So one of, in my reflections, there's a couple that I haven't put on there, I think, but the reflections, what I've found is the African community, particularly with the men, have been a little bit less forthcoming with engaging. Again, that definitely plays into the stigma of, you know, how they need to represent themselves. And I had a really interesting conversation with one gentleman who was Bradford University alumni. And he was talking about how it's kind of changing with the next generation that's coming up, which is really exciting. But even then, he didn't want me to kind of write anything down. He didn't want anything to, even if I was doing it anonymously, he just didn't feel comfortable with it kind of being recorded. So that's kind of something that I'm going to have to work on. And I think that's going to come with building some trust. And again, like I said at the beginning, by making my presence known and just kind of just keep showing my face until people get to know me, because it's a conversation, you know, that I need to make sure that they're getting to know me as well as me getting to know them. And again, like Aisha touched on, the listening. I'm a big talker and I always have a lot of energy. And what I've learned is just taking a step back and not just kind of hearing what they're saying, but like really listening to what they're saying is going to make such a huge difference. And that's going to allow me to be supportive, because I'm actually taking on what they're saying. I can give the feedback and then we can kind of come together and work out a plan with them on what to do based on what they've told me. Another one of my reflections is that this is not going to be changed overnight. What we're talking about is really going down to the root of kind of systemic systemic racism and systemic issues in the services, and it's not going to just happen with a couple of conversations. This is going to have to be something that is ongoing forever for it to just kind of stay where we need it to be once we get there. And again, that long term, that's going to come with patience and not trying to rush the process, because if we rush it, it's never going to be right. We need to make sure that we're really, really taking on board what people are saying, because at the end of the day, the service that we're trying to create is for them. And the reason why it hasn't worked so far is because we're kind of telling people what they need. And now it's time for us to listen to what they need and be able to put that into practice. But yeah, that's me. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Aisha and Aston. Despite being in post for just a short while, I'm sure each of you can see just, again, how proactive they've been and just the great work they've done so far. So thank you so much. And I'm sure each of you noticed as well, as Aisha and Aston shared their learnings and reflections, as part of what they shared, they shared some strengths tied to each of these communities. And I think oftentimes when we are speaking when we're speaking generally about reducing health inequalities for people from ethnically and culturally diverse communities, I think it can be very easy for us just to focus on the issues, the problems, but actually, as we've heard from Aisha and Aston, there's so much to be celebrated within these communities. So thank you once again to both of you. Next slide, please. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Isabel. So in the absence of a community engagement worker working with the Eastern European community, we have thankfully still been able to get out into the community and engage and gather some feedback. Before sort of elaborating on these, and you'll see that there are similarities to what Aston and Aisha have found. I just want to highlight that with the Eastern European community, we're also working closely with the Roma community within this group. Now, the Roma community are a nomadic people, and they've been spread out across Eastern Europe for centuries. And this particular group have faced a lot of discrimination, a lot of racism, a lot of violence. And because of this, and because of what the research shows, as a program, we recognize that we need to seek to reduce those barriers, reduce those inequalities for this particular group, and provide them with mental health support. So thankfully, like I said, we've been able to engage with the Eastern European community and the Roma community. And what we've found, again, similarly, a very tight-knit group, very strong in terms of community spirit. And I mean, that really seeps into resilience and creativity. When we talk about the Eastern Europeans and the Roma community, particularly the Roma community, a core element of their culture is entertainment. It's coming together. It's having food, listening to music, socializing, and that's really, really important to them. And I'm thinking about occasions where I've gone to do some outreach, and honestly, I don't leave those informal meetings. Often I'll be well fed, and generally we'll just have a really, really good time. So again, those are some sort of similarities that we've seen across each of these communities. And just with the transition, Isabel, with the challenges. So again, like I mentioned, particularly for the Roma community, we're talking about centuries where they have been discriminated against, and of course, this is going to impact upon upon them psychologically. And what we've seen, I think, particularly in Leeds, in Hare Hills, fairly recently, really speaks to that. The trauma, the mistrust of the system. Also, we know here in Bradford District and Craven, we know that the Roma community have been here for roughly 20 years. So in terms of awareness surrounding mental health, but health more broadly, there's a lot of work that we need to do in terms of understanding their culture, understanding their practices, but also raising awareness around what can be accessed, and again, really seeking to understand their needs for mental health support. So we've come to the end of our presentation. We really hope it's been informative for each of you.